Welcome to the latest episode of Gryphon Manor. In the last episode, I replaced the scaffolding-based access shafts that were in the overworld and nether with fully functioning elevators via the Create mod. And since I published that episode, I did some testing and found that I did have a problem with the call buttons, as they would briefly open the elevator doors before the elevator car actually arrived. But I fixed that. Now, I did so because I didn't want to open myself up to some negligence lawsuit from some idiot going through the open doors before the elevator car was actually there. But since I'm the only idiot running around in this world anyway, the odds of a lawsuit are pretty low, but not absolutely zero. After all, I live in the United States, so at least I would win the case either way. Now this time around, I'm going to start the planning for the first official side project, and that is the nearby village of Andover. However, before I start talking about that, I want to tell you about some big changes I've made and how I wound up making them. It all starts with the little gaming networks I'm in. Over the course of the year, the groups will cycle through different games to play together, and sometimes they're new games and sometimes they're old games. Somehow they always manage to wind up back at Minecraft during the holiday season, and generally this is when I'm most active in the groups. Now, these are the same groups that reintroduced me to modded Minecraft, and this year we played a lot with the Direwolf and Medieval Minecraft mod packs. And this time around, I had a lot more modded Minecraft experience under my belt, so I noticed a few things. Now, if you watched my Gryphon Hall series, you may remember that I had problems with performance in that series. Performance in terms of my computer keeping up with the game. Now, water wheels from the Create mod and overall structure generation while exploring the game world would bog my system down and transform the experience into a PowerPoint slideshow. Therefore, when I spun up this series, I had to forego pretty much all the structure mods, and I altered my base design to use the minimum number of water wheels and to separate them as much as possible. And I'm still not entirely sure that's going to work as planned, but I'll burn that bridge when I get to it. But as I was playing multiplayer with these mod packs, I noticed that things ran incredibly smoothly. And that was surprising, as these are big mod packs with around 300 mods each, and they are crammed with structures mods. So at first I thought that maybe this was because I was playing multiple player and we had a dedicated server, and so it was because the server was doing all the heavy lifting. But when I spun up single player worlds with these mod packs running under all the same settings I normally run with, they still ran smoothly. They ran real smoothly. So that got me to thinking. I opened up the list of mods for each mod pack, and I started going through them one by one and sorting them into categories. And after that was done, I went to the performance category and I went through each of those mods one by one to try and understand what it does and whether it would be relevant to my little single player context. Next, I loaded up the relevant mods into my little custom mod pack, and I spun up a creative world to test drive the new mix. And with just a few adjustments, the results were very impressive. So then I spun up the official Gryphon Manor save game, which was not risky, as I now keep many backups and even backups of my backups. And the results were still very impressive. But now that I know that I can run a beefy mix of mods, I want to run a beefy mix of mods, especially content and structure mods. These can and will radically change the game world, and the most practical approach would then be to start over with a whole new world. And I really don't want to do that again, so I decided to run an experiment. I expanded my mod pack with all these performance mods and a lot of additional content mods, and then I spun up a new creative world using the same seed as the official world, just to see what the impact would be. Now, I was surprised and pleased by the results. The physical land seems to be exactly the same. I even have the same river to nowhere. However, the biomes are distributed a bit differently, and of course there are structures all over the place. And all of it was purring like a kitten on my machine. So I kept the new mix, and now I'll be running with it in the official world starting now. To be honest, I do expect to see some weirdness at the border between the chunks I've already explored and loaded, and the ones that will be newly generated with the new mod mix. However, it looks like it'll be mostly a matter of biome borders and not physical land differences, and even if there are physical land differences, I wouldn't expect them to be too radical, and even if they are radical, I'll just deal with it. I think it'll be worth it in the long run. The exact changes to the mod mix are too extensive to go through here, but basically I went from just over 100 mods to just over 200 mods. Now the updated list is in the episode notes, but one major call out was the decision to include Immersive Engineering. Now that was a very hard call to make, and I'll tell you why. On the plus side, Immersive Engineering has a small overlap with the Create mod, but despite that, I think the two share a flavor and theme, and they generally complement each other, and it gives me a lot more options and greater flexibility. It fits my theme perfectly, and there's a non-trivial bit of coolness as well. Besides, I think it'll be a lot of fun. So that was the easy part of the decision. The hard part is that Immersive Engineering brings a number of new materials and ores to the game, and they're absolutely essential to using the mod. But since I'm adding Immersive Engineering to an established world, I'll only see those ores in the chunks generated by the new and expanded mod mix. And since I've already explored out 2.5 kilometers in every direction, any new ore and most other new resources will be located at least 2.5 kilometers away from the manor. So that adds a truckload of inconvenience. However, I think the pain will be temporary, though perhaps a long-term temporary. Part of the reason is that Immersive Engineering brings us the excavator, which is a kind of big multi-block piece of automated mining machinery. The way it works is that you build it in a chunk with an identified mineral deposit, and it automatically churns up truckloads of resources. But these are special mineral deposits that don't physically exist in the game world. In fact, they're logical mineral deposits that theoretically exist below the bedrock layer in the overworld, which we all know to be the void, and really filled with a whole lot of nothing. Deadly nothing to be sure, but nothing all the same. However, this means that the special mineral deposits can and probably do exist in the areas I've already explored, which means that once I can build an excavator, I can go prospecting closer to home and find useful Immersive Engineering resources nearby, and once I bring in some of those, the inconvenience will be gone. But anyway, that's not what this episode's all about. This whole project is about building a living, functioning world, not just an extensive base with all the modern conveniences, and I think a good place to start is the village of Andover, which is the closest village generated by the game. Now, the thing with Minecraft villages in general, and vanilla villages in particular, is that the game just kind of decides to plop them down here and there, regardless of where here or there actually is. Side of a cliff? No problemo. On top of a lava flow? No problemo. Now, those are the extreme examples, and most villages are just fine out in the middle of some biome, but there's not usually any logic to how or why it got there. Now, real villages aren't like that. Real villages exist because somebody at some point decided that this was a pretty good or practical place to live, and so they set down roots. And since that takes a lot of work, and it's not something that they would have taken lightly, the reason or reasons would have been fairly substantial. And whatever those reasons were, whether it was a strategic location, nearby resources, pleasant climate, or whatever, they would have had a direct impact on the size, nature, and history of that settlement. For example, settlements at crossroads tended to become bigger and richer from the trade and traffic that came down those roads. Settlements on the coast were also big hubs of trade and producers of resources and goods from the sea. Areas near hostile or untamed regions were usually fortified. I think you get the general idea. So with all that said, let's take a look at the village of Andover. As we see here, Andover is located to the southeast of the manor, and it's out in the open plains but rests on and around the end of a line of hills that run north and south. Now, I've already planned for one of the two main east-west roads to pass through this village, so that's our starting point. And with the road passing between the hill and the water and the village's location on the plains where visibility is good, I think this would have been an excellent place to put a tower or small keep back in the day to protect and regulate trade and travel. So let's say that once upon a time the local leader did exactly that. And in time, a number of villagers settled around this fortification to support the local garrison and profit from the trade that came along the road. However, that was centuries ago. Now we live in a more civilized time, and the need for well-defended towers faded over the decades. Eventually, the defenses were abandoned, and shortly thereafter, the local civilian community began to look upon the structure as a valuable source of building materials, especially for worked stone. So they would have recycled a fair bit of that for their own purposes, but there might have been a realization that all that material and the location looking out over the village and surrounding land would be an inspired choice from which to build a church or chapel. So let's go with that. The cultural center of the village will be a stone church at the top of the southernmost hill. I think I'll use the Church of St. Barnabas in Hampshire, England as my inspirational model. It's about the size of what I'm looking for, and it definitely has the look and feel I want. Then there's the rest of the village. Now, in the United Kingdom, the main street through a community is usually the one with the largest, most important commercial district. Now, in the United States, we often call this Main Street, but in the UK, it's usually called High Street. So in this case, the main road will serve as our High Street, with most of the businesses and merchants located there. There will be some side streets that extend out from there, and that's where most of the purely residential buildings will be. And on the outer edges of the village proper will be the farmers and their cottages and barns. Now at this point we have a bit of a clash between Minecraft game mechanics and real life. And if I want things to function properly in game, I'll need to defer to the game mechanics. In this case, I'm talking about the farmers. Normally, in the historical real world, they wouldn't live directly in a village, but rather some distance away and among their fields. But they would come to the village frequently to market their wares and buy needed supplies. However, the Minecraft economy is centered on villages, and they have a definite center and extend only so many blocks beyond that. And so for a farmer to function as part of the village, and they definitely need to do that, they will have to live and work within that limit. So fields and pastures will be situated much closer to the village than they probably would be in real life. And since we're talking about trying to keep the entire village fed, I don't think there'll be any of this NIMBY nonsense. But what about the rest of the local economy, right? The town is on the main east-west road, but I don't plan for it to be a major town with all the services available. So I need to figure out which specific specialists I want working within the town. Obviously, I already covered the need for farmers to feed the locals, and since the village is out on the plains, the area would be well suited for cereal cultivation. So let's go with wheat and maybe potatoes. And sheep will also thrive here, and of course chickens work out well almost anywhere. So all of that fits into the pseudo-British motif I have going, and that covers the agricultural side of things. I will include some of the other vanilla professions as well, but I definitely want to include all of the villager professions from Immersive Engineering, including the outfitter, structural engineer, machinist, electrician, and gunsmith. Now the reason for this is that since almost all of my Immersive Engineering resources will be located at least 2.5 kilometers away from the manor, this will give me access to at least some items in a much more convenient location, even though those resources will undoubtedly be expensive. But eventually I will break their little monopoly, and I'll buy Boardwalk, or I guess in this case it would be, Mayfair? As for the design of the village, the main road through town will be a little wider and more formal than the others. The side streets will be delightfully narrow, and I will try to make them twisty curvy as best as I can. Non-right angles and curves are very difficult in Minecraft at this scale. Or at least they're difficult to make look good at this scale. So I'll probably go with a lot of 90-degree zigzags. There'll be a lot of open timber wattle and daub buildings. And toward the center of the village, which I will have to figure out, will be a small circus, a town hall, a stable, and an inn. Now the circus is not a circus with clowns and elephants, or at least not necessarily. It's really just a roundish plaza at this point, and in the future, when vehicles become a mainstay on the roads, it would probably transform into a large roundabout with a plaza in the center of it. Something that's almost but not quite entirely unlike Piccadilly Circus in London, but smaller. In fact, the inn will probably be the first building I complete, as it will include a fair number of beds, and so this will be where all the villagers will live until I complete the rest of the village. Now, the town hall will just be a place for the locals to congregate, and the stables will be a place to park mounts and wagons. Now, stables in Minecraft can be tricky things when placed in villages. Simply making a stable is pretty straightforward. You create a little space for a horse, throw a couple of double doors on it, and boom, you're in business. However, when you do that in a village, it's a recipe for losing your horse because the villagers run around randomly opening and shutting doors, and sooner or later they will almost certainly wind up freeing whatever mounts are living in the stable. Now, I have some workarounds, but this is definitely one of the things that must defer to in-game mechanics and behaviors rather than what would look good or be closer to real life. Speaking of in-game mechanics, there is the very real threat of a raid on the village, which is not something that this kind of village or environment would normally need to worry about unless you wish to count the occasional clash of soccer, football hooligans. Normally, I would build walls, towers, gates, and the whole assorted medieval defense package, but this is a steampunkish world, and that doesn't really work so well in this case. But on the other hand, I'm now playing modded Minecraft, and one of my mods is the Guard Villagers mod. So I think I can skip building the traditional stone battlements and instead arm a local constabulary. Now, I've not done much with them up to this point, but I do know that I can equip them as I wish, and I suspect that they can probably use firearms. So I might try to equip them with firearms and black leather armor as a kind of uniformed police force. Of course, the vast majority of police officers in the UK, currently and historically, did not and do not carry firearms. But then again, they don't have creepers, zombies, skeletons, and big honking spiders walking through their neighborhoods every night. So again, some artistic and historical licenses required. And of course, I will need to build a proper roadway from the manor to Andover. Now, there's still the question and consideration of the surface railway as opposed to my underground metro that will be centered on the manor. However, I have only the vaguest ideas around what that means at the moment, and though they do concern Andover, the railway is something that I can add later on, which is usually how it worked out in real life anyway. And I think that's pretty much all that can be said about Andover at the moment. But in the next episode, I will return to the manor to excavate the base workshop and storage areas. Now, these are the largest levels of the base, and frankly, I don't yet have plans for all that space yet. I know there's still a lot of stuff that I don't know about buried in the mods I use, and I want to make sure I have space to integrate all that goodness once I sort it out, which means that at the moment, I have a lot more space planned than I actually need. Therefore, I might limit my excavation and building to just the bits that I can use in the here and now, and then add and finish the rest as needed or as time allows. Yeah, that's another knot to untie at a later date. But in the meanwhile, I got a bunch of mining to do. So with all of that said, I hope this finds you and yours in good health, good spirits, and a touch of good fortune. Take care of yourselves, and cheers.